Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us today. I'm June Rawl. Today's webinar is titled Keeping Students Connected, Engaging Activities for the Virtual ABE Reading and Language Arts Classrooms. You know, we talk a lot about student engagement, and in any settings, it's really important. But today's webinar, we're going to focus on student engagement in a virtual setting. Our facilitator today is Maria Gutierrez from Miami-Dade County Public Schools, and she's going to explore with us together some instructional activities and ways that we can really maximize this student engagement, again, in a virtual setting. Maria, I'm going to turn it over to you. Everyone enjoy the webinar, and I'll be in the background.
Thank you, June. Before we get started, I just want to go over some housekeeping rules. Remember that if you have a question, you may type it into the Q&A option and hit the send button. All attendee microphones will be muted, so you will be in listen-only mode. And today's presentation is being recorded, and it will be available for access on our IPDE website within 48 hours. And also, please be aware that all corresponding resources, such as the companion resource handbook for this webinar training, have already been uploaded and are available to all of you on our IPDE website. So again, welcome and good afternoon. Today's training, as June said, is centered around engaging online activities that you can easily incorporate into your instructional framework in order to keep your students connected in this virtual ABE reading and language classroom. So let's open the training by looking at some guiding questions. Now, as adult educators, most of us are new to delivering online instruction. As such, we do share similar questions about how to best keep our students actively engaged in online learning. But, you know, before I begin this training officially, I just want to open with some guiding questions. How can we keep students engaged during online lessons? What activity types work best to engage students in a virtual environment? And how can I continue to increase the level of active student engagement in my online course? You know, keep these questions in mind throughout the duration of this training. Now, in this training, we're going to follow or cover the following objectives. First, we're going to define active learning. We will then identify 3 ways in which our students can interact online. And finally, we will explore engaging online activities that can be easily integrated into the instructional framework for your virtual course. Now, when we ponder how we can develop engaging activities for our virtual ABE reading and language classrooms, we really need to start by addressing active learning. After gaining a sense of what active learning is and what it entails, we can then address 3 types of interactions and different activity types that fall under each of these categories, right? And the 3 interactions that will be addressed individually in this training in parts 2 to 4 include student-to-teacher interactions, student-to-student interactions, and student-to-content interactions. Now, once we have a clear understanding of each interaction and the types of activities that fall under each, then we can look at some already developed, successful, and super easy to implement engaging online activities for your ABE and reading and language classes that I hope you will immediately begin to implement in your online classrooms. All right, so let's get started. You know, we hear a lot about the difficulty of keeping students engaged and actively learning online. So let's begin by addressing the question, what is active learning? According to Halpern and Haeckel, authors of Applying the Science of Learning, student learning success is impacted more by what students are asked to do by their teachers than by what the teachers themselves do. So there's actually a considerable amount of research on active learning, but for the sake of practicality and simplicity, we are going to focus on 3 active learning techniques that are empirically well established. The first is generate, And as teachers, it is critical that we ask students to generate connections, questions, and solutions. This will increase their comprehension and ability to recall because rather than just focus on receiving information from the teacher, it emphasizes a more active expectation where students are required to produce ideas. Next, let's talk about integrate. The next best practice we need to address when talking about active learning has to do with helping students integrate new information with their pre-existing knowledge. So in other words, it's important for students to be able to make meaningful connections between this new content and prior beliefs, ideas, and experiences. The third technique is retrieve. Now, finally, students must have repeated opportunities to retrieve learned information, and this will promote long-term retention of new content. Now, as we go through today's training, I want you to keep these 3 active learning techniques in mind: generate, integrate, and retrieve. You'll notice that every sample activity that is shared in part 5 of this training will incorporate all 3 techniques. Now that we have these top 3 techniques down, it's time to address the 3 types of interactions that fall under active learning. First, we have student-to-teacher interaction. When we look at student-to-teacher interaction, we refer to the climate of communication between the teacher and the students in the class. To illustrate, a common student-to-teacher interaction activity is the class lecture. Remember, though, that as we delve deeper into each interaction, it's important for you to remember that we still need to shape activities under each to include the top 3 techniques on the slide, the generate, integrate, and retrieve techniques. Next, we have student-to-student interaction, and this refers to how well students communicate with each other in class. So, for example, if you assign a group project, how will your students communicate and build the project together? What specific opportunities will be provided for them to generate, integrate, and retrieve? And third, we have the student-to-content interaction. Finally, this interaction refers to how students interact with course content, obviously, through learning activities. An example would be the use of a particular software application to support class instruction. And we would need to ask ourselves, okay, so what type of activities are provided within the software that incorporate the mentioned top 3 techniques? Now, let's take a separate look at each of the 3 interactions introduced. Let's move to part 2, and we begin with student-to-teacher interaction. Okay, so you have an understanding of the 3 types of interactions that we are addressing under active learning. And now we're going to take a more in-depth look at each one individually. We begin with student-teacher interaction because honestly, this is the one that the majority of you are the most familiar with. The objectives as we dig deeper into each of these are standardized throughout. So first, we're going to address exactly what student-to-teacher interaction is and what its significance is with regard to active learning. Then we're going to identify the most common activity types that fall under this type of interaction. And we'll also look at how these activities can be incorporated into your online classrooms. So for example, what features or applications can you use to create these types of activities? When we talk about student-to-teacher interaction, we specifically refer to the way that students and teachers interact in their classroom relationship. You know, a substantive amount of this type of interaction is required for online courses. To ensure that a teacher is making the greatest impact on online student learning, this teacher needs to ensure that interactions with students are based on each individual student's learning needs, expectations, and experiences. Now, usually the focus for this type of interaction is on learning a skill or content that reflects the desired outcomes or consequences of that interaction. Let's take a look at some sample activity types under the student-teacher category. As I begin to walk you through some student-to-teacher interaction activity types, you'll see that you are no stranger to many of them. Now, due to time limitations, I'm including the most common ones on this slide. Let's just kind of briefly address each bullet. Discussion forums. Chat rooms or social networks are popular mediums used for student-to-teacher interactions. Teachers can also provide feedback on assignments via emails or journals. And when setting up office hours, you may want to consider chat rooms or web conferencing options. The same applies when mentoring or tutoring students. Some teachers become experts at creating peer teaching opportunities. And with peer teaching, small groups of students are assigned to help teach portions of a course, right? Usually via web conferencing. Student-to-teacher interaction can also take place via posted announcements. And finally, guest speakers who are experts are really becoming quite popular in our virtual teaching world. You know, these experts take the place of the teacher at times, and they can provide students with much valuable information via discussion boards, web conferencing, or, you know, even chat rooms. Now, let's move on to the next type of interaction, student-to-student interaction. Now, as we take a more in-depth look at this, we're first going to address exactly what it is, along with its significance with regard to active learning. Then we're going to identify the most common activities under the student-to-student interaction. And we'll see how these can be incorporated into your classrooms, okay? And basically, we're just going to look and see what features or what applications you can use to create these types of activities. Now, when we talk about student-to-student interaction, we specifically refer to the way that students interact with other students in their classrooms. This type of interaction can include formal course-driven or course-related collaboration, but it can also include informal social interaction. You know, the key to success here is for students to become comfortable with each other and with the online learning environment. Let's look at some sample activity types under this student-to-student category. Now, I've got to admit that student-to-student interaction is probably the activity type that I dedicate the most time to during the instructional day. I've found from personal experience that it really helps to establish a strong culture of learning in an online course, right? And it also helps develop engaging relationships that support a high level of student engagement. Now, activity types under this category are also fairly easy to implement. You know, let's quickly run through the bullets on the slide. Group projects are an easy way for students to engage with each other in order to achieve a common goal. And then once the project is complete, they can present to other class members via discussion boards or even web conferencing. Now, we discussed peer teacher under student-to-teacher interaction because in essence, the peer teacher is functioning as a teacher. But we can also slip this activity type under student-to-student interaction because it is, after all, a student or a peer who is providing the instruction. And peer review is slightly different from peer teacher. So rather than teach content, peer reviewers work to edit each other's assignments, and they could do this via group discussion boards, text, chat rooms, emails, even Google Docs. Now, students may also participate in synchronous or asynchronous discussions or debates where they're provided with an opportunity to expand on both sides of an argument. Social distancing. Wow, it's this COVID thing. It's killing all of us. Social networking is almost a requirement for online courses nowadays, right? A teacher can set up a social network for the course so that everyone can communicate on any topic. And we also have collaborative brainstorming, and that's brainstorming that's used to promote creative thinking via a free association of ideas, and it happens usually at the beginning of specific lessons. And you can do this via chat rooms or discussion boards as well. And let's not forget to incorporate polls or surveys and even games into your online instructional framework. You know, variety is key to engagement as well. Now, as we continue with part 4, we're going to look at student to content interaction. First, we're going to address exactly what it is and what its significance is with regards to active learning. Then we're going to identify the most common activity types under student to content interaction. And we're going to look at these activities and how they can be incorporated into your online classrooms. Now, student to content interaction is really just that. We don't need to complicate it. It's students' interaction with course materials and course content. But it does go beyond this. student to content interaction also includes abstract interactions with concepts and ideas. Let's explore some activity types under this category so you can better understand what these abstract interactions include. Now, here on this slide, you have some sample activities that fall under the student to content interaction. Tutorials and quizzes are the most common, right? But simple web links to external sites that support instructional content also fall under this category. Web links should actually be incorporated into nearly every online class because it does provide students with an opportunity to use the internet for additional research. So you may also incorporate text or video discussions and have students maybe reflect on the content using journals or discussion boards or papers or even video clips. In some course topics, simulations may be appropriate and may provide students with a more genuine experience and a greater opportunity to retain and apply learned content. Now, at this time, I just want to place special emphasis on the next bullet, mobile learning. Most learning management systems, or LMS, offer students and teachers both a web application and a mobile device application. These downloadable mobile apps that support mobile learning can be downloaded by users for anytime, any place access. And finally, let's not forget to mention these super popular mini lectures, right? In the form of narrated PowerPoints like this one, video clips, podcasts, right, etc. So much more, so much nowadays. Now, we're finally at the last and probably my favorite part of the training, where together we're going to explore several sample activities under each type of interaction that are sure to yield an increased level of active student engagement in your online classes, and that can be easily incorporated into your existing online instructional framework. So I want to give you a heads up. We're going to go over as many activities as we can, time permitting, but should we run short on time, I want to let you know that you can relax and be confident that all of the activities can be found in the companion resource handbook for this webinar training. Each activity in the handbook is carefully outlined and explained, and full-size copies of the documents and resources for each of the activities can also be obtained from the handbook. Okay, let's start with some overarching information for all of the activities. Now, due to the already mentioned time constraint, I want to be sure to share activities which are going to yield maximum student engagement, but are also going to be very easy for you to immediately begin to integrate into your instruction. So I also wanted to, all of the activities, to incorporate those 3 established active learning techniques that were mentioned at the beginning of this training. I'm referring to generate, integrate, and retrieve techniques. And just in case you forgot, let me just briefly remind you, generate, with generate, you're going to remind students to generate connections, questions, and solutions, right, to increase comprehension. When you ask them to integrate, that's going to remind you to help the students integrate new information with pre-existing knowledge, right, so they can make meaningful connections. And finally, retrieve refers to providing the students with repeated opportunities to retrieve the learned information and do so frequently to promote long-term retention, right? Okay. I will start with some very brief activities that you can fit in just about anywhere in your instructional framework. And then we're going to move to a longer activity, and we're going to close with 2 shorter ones. So let's get going. Now, as we progress through the activities, keep in mind that all are related to the topic of social media influencers. Together, all activities address TABE-tested reading and language skills. You'll also see that I specifically outlined the TABE-related skills for each. This is important because I want you to be able to tie in these skills with your students' individualized instructional student plans. Remember those, or the IISPs, and the common planning tools, which we previously shared with you in other trainings for the multi-level ABE classrooms. All of this, by the way, is available on our IPDE website. Now, in addition, please note that these activity types, they were selected because they provide opportunities for student to teacher, student to student, and student to content interactions. And of course, as previously mentioned, they also incorporate the 3 active learning techniques: generate, integrate, and retrieve. All right, let's take a look at the types of interactions that I'm going to be sharing. Now, remember, we're going to cover as many as we can, but for your peace of mind, they're all available in the handbook. Let's begin with activity number 1. This activity is a close reading activity, which you will do using a funny meme related to the topic. Activity 2 is called a 1-minute opinion. Activity 3 consists of a short read followed by a brainstorming activity. Activity 4 emphasizes the language portion of the lesson, focusing on combining sentences. Activity 5 is a quiz. And activity number 6 is a journal entry type activity. And I'm also going to share an extension of this activity. Now let's continue by identifying the TABE skills covered within these. Here we have a summary overview of the activities I'm going to be sharing. First and foremost, to confirm, all of the activities incorporate reading and language TABE skills. They target TABE levels D and A, and the readings are approximately at a 940 Lexile level. Next, you'll see that the activities cover a significant amount of tested TABE reading and TABE language skills. Now, as usual, you know the key word here is tested, because we know that it is essential that we emphasize tested content in order to ensure that our students can progress from one functional level to the next. Now, under reading, you can see that emphasis is placed on 5 tested TABE skills. And here, under language, you can see that the selected activities emphasize 9 tested TABE skills. So let's look at our first one. Activity 1 is a close reading activity that you'll do using a meme. It's a fun activity that can double as a warm-up one. And if you look at this slide, you see 3 pictures that you can use. Now, if you prefer to use the same picture for all of your student groups, that's going to work just as well. Remember, if your students have never done close reading with a picture or meme, be sure to first model the process. And you may also need to define what a meme is. Now, provide students with the significance of incorporating close reading strategies, right? And explain that it isn't just about the reading a source text or a meme multiple times. That's not the point. It's about getting them to follow a process and put it into place. And it's also about obviously actively engaging them in the process. Now, students will be reading each picture or meme 3 times. Be sure to clearly outline the steps for each read. And here they are. Now you're going to do 3 reads, but before beginning the first read, give students the 4 steps. 1, tell them you're going to show them a meme. 2, show them the meme for 5 seconds. 3, tell them you're going to remove it. And then you're going to ask them to provide information on what the meme is about. Now, students can participate via web conferencing, or you may prefer to have them share details via the course chat. Either one will work. During the second read, you're going to repeat the original 4 steps. The only difference now is that you're going to show the meme for 10 seconds instead of 5. And when you remove it, you're going to ask the students specific details about what they saw. You know, prompt them, ask them, what's going on in the picture? What do you see that makes you say that? During the last read, the third read, you're again going to repeat the original 4 steps, but you're going to show the meme for 15 seconds. You're going to remove it, and you're going to again ask the students this time to dig deeper and to analyze the meme. So for example, ask them, what more can you find? What can you infer? Now, as you conclude the activity, remind your students that close reading is a strategy that's going to help them to become better readers. And please refer to the companion resource handbook for more details on this, by the way. All right, before we continue with activity number 2, I want to draw attention to this little red label on the slide. Throughout the remainder of the training, you're going to see the suggested mediums for each activity in red. It's just an easy thing to look for. Let's keep moving. Before we begin the 1-minute opinion activity, you may wish to share and discuss the information presented on this slide with your students. This will provide them with a better knowledge base for the upcoming activities, as well as jumpstart them on making connections to prior knowledge on the topic. So for example, since all the activities are related to the topic of social media influencers, students need to understand what the topic means. What is it referring to? Begin the 1-minute opinion activity by providing a question or situation on the topic. In this case, you're going to ask the question, are social media influencers worth the cost? Second, group your students into breakout rooms. Now, as students work in their respective breakout rooms, be sure to pop in and out, right? So that you can monitor this activity and make sure that students are on task and that everyone is contributing. And then, of course, you can also provide guidance and corrective feedback as necessary. Now, third, give clear instructions to all students on providing an opinion on the topic. First, each group is to discuss the question. B, every person in the group is required to provide an opinion or a response to the question. C, students are then to discuss the opinion and responses of members within their breakout room, and they're to vote on and select one opinion or response that they will share out with the other groups at the end of the activity. And D, students then have to work together to come up with 3 reasons to support their selection. Now, let's move to number 4. Here, just be sure to limit the amount of time that students will be allowed to work on the activity. In this case, 5 to 10 minutes is enough. And also be sure to let your students know that they'll be allowed to speak for no longer than 1 minute. You're going to have to cut some of them off. And at number 5, just tell the students that they must select only one person to share out. Whether in this activity or others, by the way, just be sure that every student has an opportunity to share out. So you might want to keep like a little tab of this. Now, activity number 3 begins with a short read that transitions into a brainstorming activity. Now, you may read the brief article excerpt, right, consisting of these 2 paragraphs here, right, to your class, or maybe you prefer to ask for volunteers to do the reading. Just a reminder that you can access all this content in the resource handbook. Now, once you've read the article, have every student come up with 2 questions about the article. Now, you're requesting 2 questions to avoid the possibility of doubling up on the same questions throughout the rest of the activity, okay? 3, start a discussion post by selecting one student to type in his or her question. 4, ask the remaining students in the class to respond to the question by posting a response. This can get a little tricky. It can. Be sure to let your students know that once 2 responses have been posted, no additional responses will be allowed. Otherwise, this will never end. So students need to follow carefully to ensure that they do not type any additional responses beyond that second response. Now, once a student has had an opportunity to post a response, he should hold off on posting additional ones until all students have had a chance to participate. 5, you're going to repeat steps 3 and 4 until every student has participated, right? And then in 6, be sure that as the teacher, you keep tabs on questions and responses posted throughout so that every student does get a turn to participate in both parts of the activity. You could use this little T chart here. It's a good example. All right, we're doing great. We're moving right along. Now, let's look at activity number 4. And this happens to be the longest activity. It's actually divided into 2 parts. The first part emphasizes the language TABE skill on combining sentences, along with other associated TABE skills, which we saw on slide 27, I think it was. The second part of the activity emphasizes reading TABE skills, such as identifying central idea and drawing inference. Now, for this activity, I selected the article Influencers, the Modern Entrepreneur, and this article is from Newsela. Now, just a little break here, little sidebar. If you have never used Newsela as a resource for topic-related and Lexile-leveled articles for your ABE reading and language classes, be sure to create a free account after this training. Newsela has an ever-growing bank of articles on all sorts of topics. And most of the articles also have quizzes that you can use to assess mastery of certain TABE skills. And one additional feature, which is my favorite one, is that every article or most of them, are available at multiple Lexile levels. So all you have to do is select the appropriate level for your class, right? Or even an individual student. And you can access an adapted version of the article fitting that selected Lexile level. You got to check out the website. Here's the web address. It's going to be well worth your while. Now, we begin with part 1 of the activity number 4. There are certain prerequisite skills for successful completion of this activity. Now, students must have already received instruction and demonstrated some degree of mastery of the language content that's listed on this slide. And yes, you will again notice that these are the emphasized TABE language skills on slide 27. Again, emphasized because these are tested TABE skills. Now, there are 5 steps to the first part of the activity. 1, you're going to tell the students that they're going to be reading an article on the topic for the day, which we said was social media influencers. Emphasize that they're going to pay close attention to certain sentences that have been highlighted within the article. Next, tell them that the purpose of the activity is for them to practice combining sentences. Now, you may wish to take a brief moment to discuss the various ways in which they can, and they can combine pieces of information, fragments, clauses, etc., into a single sentence to avoid choppiness, to avoid repetition, and improve sentence clarity, right? But the goal of the activity is for each student to be able to combine all of the information in a highlighted group of sentences into one single sentence. 3, tell the students that there are suggested clues on how to combine the sentences in brackets following each highlighted section. So it's not all like, however you want to do it. There will be specific clues. 4, the original article is provided in a Word document, so the students will be able to type their revised sentences after each bracket. And then finally, just tell them they're going to have about 15 to 20 minutes to complete the activity. Let's take a look at the activity on the next slide. Here's an example. You see that 3 sentences have been highlighted in yellow. These are the 3 sentences that need to be combined. Next, you have the suggested language application for combining these sentences. Now, this appears within brackets. In this particular example, the suggestion reads items in a series. Now, since there are 3 sentences with the same subjects, right? You can combine them by writing the subject once, and the subject being they may get their followers to, and then you're going to combine the 3 predicates, meanwhile separating them with commas as appropriate. So you're going to add quotations by products, right, followed by a comma. You're going to add quotations support a clause, followed by a comma, and then you're going to add the conjunction or followed by the last verb phrase, vacation in a certain place. And you're going to end it with a period. Now, you may want to give students a heads up that there may be more than one correct final sentence, right? This is okay, not a problem. And at the end of the allotted time, students are to save their work and upload the assignments to the virtual platform. Now, I want to make another brief note before we move to part 2 of the activity. And this activity is actually a student to content interaction activity, but you can also modify the activity for lower level students by having them work together in breakout rooms and provide one group product where all the participants receive the same score. It puts a lot less pressure. And just look at the resource handbook so that you can see how we can break that up. Okay, now, as we continue with part 2, you see that there are certain prerequisite skills for successful completion of the activity, just like in part 1. Students must have already received instruction and demonstrated some degree of mastery of the reading content that's listed on this slide. And then if you're wondering, oh, I saw this before, yes, we listed these on slide 26. Now, as you can see on this slide, close reading, is an integral component of activity number 4. So if you do need additional information on close reading, I really strongly recommend that you go back to one of our previously recorded trainings titled and the workbook titled 3 Times a Charm, Engaging ABE ESOL Students in Close Reading. It is a phenomenal training. I use it all the time. They have a lot of resources there as well. Okay, so because the emphasis for part 2 is on reading, right? Not like the previous one on language, I always like to ensure that students apply this close reading strategies as they complete the activities. So there's 2 ways that you can approach the activity. You can either direct the activity via web conferencing, or you can have students complete it on their own. If you're working with low-level students, you may wish to guide the activity. The steps that are outlined on this training are for this guided application. So let's first do a close reading. Now, once you've completed the close reading, have your students take and submit the quiz. You may wish to have like a general discussion to review the correct answers for each of the 4 questions. Take this as an opportunity to have students provide evidence as to why certain answer choices are correct or incorrect, right? But again, look at the handbook for more details on each of these 3 reads. Let's take a quick glance at the next activity, which is the assessment piece or the quiz. Now, here is the quiz. It came from Mozilla. I didn't even have to create it. Now, you have a full-size copy of this in the handbook, right? So you can reproduce it. And be sure to request evidence from your students as you go through each one of these questions and correct answers. Now we're ready for activity number 6. We're still on the same topic, right? So activity 6 is a journaling activity, and we're going to do it using a YouTube video on the topic. The video that I selected here is titled Inside the Big Business of Being a Social Media Influencer. Okay. Now, you need to tell the students that they're going to write a journal entry responding to the video. Encourage them to be creative, but please make sure that they respond to the topic. 3, be sure to assign a minimum number of sentences. I normally do about 8 to 10. And then advise your students that at least 6 to 8 of these sentences need to be complex sentences. Why? This provides them with an opportunity to practice combining sentences, which you taught them in the earlier activity. Now, also, let me just make a brief note regarding the number of sentences for the activity. Please set the number of sentences based on the course level. The higher the course level, the higher the number of sentences. Pretty simple. And then finally, number 4, assign a maximum of 10 to 15 minutes for the activity. And don't forget to tell the students that they're not required to share their journal entries unless they wish to do so. So it just makes it easier for them. So I love these journaling activities. All right, now let's look at an extension activity to this journaling one. So you can use the prior activity and extend it as follows. 1, after you complete the journaling activity, just have the students submit their individual entries as Word documents. You as the teacher are going to select 3 to 4 entries, and you're going to post them during the following class meeting date. So be sure to post 1 entry at a time, right? And keep the authors anonymous. Don't forget to do that. And then you're going to implement peer review. You're going to ask the students to read each entry and provide corrective feedback. And place emphasis on the application of the content and information learned during prior instruction, right? So we were talking about, combining sentences, use of commas, right? So you want to make sure that they apply this information. Now, let me just share an easy tip. You can adapt activities 1, 2, 3, and 6 easily to fit any topic. So the activity on what do you mean, the 1-minute opinion, the brainstorming activity, and the journaling activity with the extension, all of them can be easily applied to any topic, any level. Now, as we conclude our webinar on keeping students connected, right? I want you to remember this. When developing these engaging virtual lessons, do it in a planned, purposeful manner. Clearly define goals around what you want students to know and be able to accomplish for every activity. And don't forget to assess mastery. This is going to help you figure out ways in which you can improve virtual lesson activities that will address required content and that will support your students' success. Now, as always, you know that I have to end my trainings by emphasizing a growth mindset. So I'm going to ask you again to take what you have learned in this training and let's take it one step further. First, change how you develop or select lessons for your virtual classes. Use the techniques and sample activity templates that were shared during this training to keep your students actively engaged. Redesign your online activities. Ensure that you incorporate the suggested techniques into all activities. Also incorporate a variety of activities that address student to teacher, student to student, and student to content interactions in order to provide students with a variety of opportunities to actively engage in this virtual setting. Review all of the information provided in the training. Share it with teachers, administrators, and district personnel, and become an expert on developing actively engaging activities and lessons for your virtual classes. Have roundtable discussions with your administrative team and your instructional team, and share the wealth to ensure that all of your students remain actively engaged online. Trust me, you will be grateful when you look at your enrollment numbers. And finally, reflect and make a change. Ask yourself, what is working especially well in my virtual classroom and what is not? Develop a planning checklist to ensure that you incorporate these best practices and techniques in the development of online activities, as well as include activities that address all three types of interactions. Continuously evaluate the effectiveness of your online activities. Request feedback from students and use this feedback to make improvements. Share your student success with other teachers and be super proactive in helping them implement changes that will support active student engagement during their online courses as well. And this, folks, concludes our webinar, Keeping Students Connected, Engaging Activities for the Virtual ABE Reading and Language Classrooms. And at this time, I believe we do have a few. I kind of rushed through this because I wanted to have a little bit of time to answer some questions if you had any. So June, I'm going to let you select any questions that pop up and let me know, and we'll answer them for you as best we can.
Yeah, Maria, we have been addressing the questions throughout, so really we're clear on the questions. It's just
Awesome.
A lot of people are saying that they really enjoyed the activities, and thank you for making them so they can implement them into their classrooms. Really great ideas. Using student feedback to make improvements is a great tool. So really some nice comments from the field. I thank you so much for that. So at this point, we're going to put up our feedback slide. And if you could take a minute to just fill out these 3 short questions. We always like to get your feedback on what you thought of the webinar and if you would recommend it to others and apply what you've learned from this webinar. While you do that, I will thank you for joining us today and ask that you join us again next Wednesday, February 17th, for some more IET stuff. So we're going to be talking about the beginner's guide to IET. So we hope to see all of you again next week. Until then, please stay well and take care of yourself. And thank you for all that you're doing for the field. We appreciate it.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure.